Time. It's one of the greatest commodities.
Welcome to the Living Superfood Show. My name is Umoya, and I'm here with my co-host, the one and only Master Chef, Health and Food Scientist, Keidi Awadu. How you doing today, Keidi?
We black and we shine always enjoy these conversations about some of our favorite topics, food, and the health that should follow.
All right. So today the topic is who is Keidi Awadu and living on a plant-based diet. So the first question is, where were you born, and can you give the people a little bit of information on growing up?
Sure, I'll make this as brief as I possibly can. I always like short introductions. I was born in Columbus, Ohio, at University Hospital, somewhere in the mid 1950s. I was a twin, so I shared that birth date with somebody who I've grown to know pretty well. And about growing up, it was very interesting because our father was an industrial chemist. He was actually son of sharecroppers, the ninth and last children born to a very poor North Carolina family. But he went off to war and then went to college, where he earned his degree in industrial chemistry and became a professional industrial chemist working for a large U.S. corporation. And he purchased a home we're about 4 years old. My father purchased land actually and built his own home, contracted to have his own home built on 1 1/3 acres in rural Ohio, 3 miles too far outside of Columbus. So we grew up homesteading. We grew food. We had a beautiful orchard there. We learned all kinds of skills and talents. Our mother was really quite a genius. She was in college at the age of 16. And so she homeschooled us, where we were able to develop a high level of literacy very early. I can recall learning to speak French, self-taught from my father's college textbooks were in our library at the home. So that's how academic and literate our home was. So growing up in that environment, when I finished high school, instead of enrolling in college, which I had superb grades, honor roll all throughout my schooling years. But instead of enrolling for college, I ended up working in a biological research laboratory 1 year after high school graduation. So where most people would have been going to college, I was actually having hands-on experience as a cryogenics technician working in a cell biology research and production laboratory. Quite an experience, and much of that has resounded all throughout my life. Of course, I stayed there 4 years, got fired, and then spent the next 30 years, a better part of the next 30 years, as a professional musician, touring, writing, recording, and doing all that stuff.
All right. So I guess we'll go to the second question. Has your name always been Keidi? Why did you decide to change it to Keidi Awadu, and what does Keidi Awadu mean?
Well, I've always been known as Keidi. That was the only name I've ever been recalled. I did have a legal name, which I still retain, a taxpayer name I call it. Unless I owe you taxes, I generally try and avoid using it. Because I don't necessarily think I look very much like a Scottish man. So when my parents named me a Scottish man's name, I presume they were just having an inside joke. But I've
That's
always been
funny.
known as Keidi. And then later realizing that that was a part of an identity that was seeking to find me and bring me back to my fundamentally African identity. So the name Keidi became Keidi Obi. Obi is a Igbo term from Nigeria, meaning king of the land. And Awadu is a term that can be considered to be Nigerian in many ways, but it also relates to the indigenous people, the Aboriginal people, the black fellows of Australia. And that relates to a long sojourn journey that one engages about. They call the walkabout. So, Keidi Obi Awadu, one who has discovered self on the pathway to omnipotence, to being king of the land. And now that so much of my life is centered around agriculture, food, and these other related sciences, I definitely would agree that that was a name that led me along the perfect pathway.
All right. So, at what point in your life did you decide to transition to a plant based diet and why?
Growing up with extended gardens at our home and orchards, my father was really a genius at it. And he had us out there at a very young age working the garden. We had a very large garden, one of the biggest ones in our neighborhood of 21 houses. And he even planted 7 100-foot rows of strawberries to where once we filled up our own stock with canning and freezing, we then had a local strawberry franchise for much of the summer. So that was just really a brilliant insight on my father's part. But later, after I left the job and I went out into the road, I was playing reggae music and hanging around the Rastas and the Rastafarian culture. They informed me of a concept called Ital food. Ital food essentially means clean food. And so I learned to eat Ital. Then later, when I resettled in California permanently, Ital food became the vegetarian lifestyle. So having a good science basis for understanding nutrition and being a part of that environment in California, back in them days, we were called health nuts. So I was a nuts nut. And eventually that led me to vegan, and eventually vegan led me to the living food, raw food, superfood, detox lifestyle, orthomolecular medicine. So it was really a blending of the science inquisitiveness along with this peer anchoring of people who wanted to eat clean that has led me to the state where I'm at now.
All right. So, are any of your family members, including your children, plant based?
I am one of four sons, and of the four sons, I'm the only one that is the committed vegetarian slash vegan or superfoodist. I think my brothers need to be doing this I am tied for the youngest, and so as my brothers are getting mature, they're starting to go through those health issues, especially the way that African Americans have so many dietary health conditions that they're dealing with. I've tried my best to encourage them. It's interesting because other family members, extended family members, such as one of my older brother's wives, strictly vegan for many years, raised a vegan child, my niece. And I have three daughters, all of whom were raised very strictly vegan, especially we grew our own food, so we are organic vegans raising our children. Of the three children, all of them have stayed on a very healthy lifestyle. One of them dabbles a little bit, I think, in seafood and used to dabble in chicken, but I think she's given that up now because she's married to a vegetarian vegan now. And so that household. But the other two daughters, not only are they very strict vegans, but my middle daughter, Maya is her name, has turned out to be a superb health coach, yoga instructor, a celebrity chef herself, and just a magnificent chef. She is really, really impressive. And she also models in the healthy food sector and models for several companies that put out some pretty healthy products. So very pleased as a daddy. The daughters make me so proud.
Nice. All right. So, the next question is, why do you think it is difficult for some people to incorporate a full or even partial plant based lifestyle?
I think the difficulty really belies the culture. We often talk about behavioral research and what is it that modulates our individual and our collective behavior, and that is culture. And for one, we have a culture of food in America which is rather bizarre. Americans eat trashy in a way that other nations around the world, especially other mature nations around the world, regard as rather barbaric. But at the same time, when we look at people of African heritage in the United States, we have inherited a legacy of scrap eating, and meaning, the parts of the pig that others would throw away, the ears, the feet, the tail, the jowls, the skin, the guts. Well, our people, in our brilliance of overcoming the Ma'afa, the great oppression, learned to turn these scraps into what were regarded as delicacies. Unfortunately, the way we have culturally learned to eat soul food is the source of much damage to the body's inherent natural system. It's malnutrition on a very large scale. So why is it so difficult? Because culture is such a determinant of individual and collective behavior. It is really difficult to break away from cultural paradigms and impose other new paradigms, or a paradox or paradigm shift, one might say, that would lend us to having healthy food and healthy nutrition and the lifestyle that would follow. So therefore, when we examine health statistics for African Americans in particular and Americans in general, we find that this culture of malnutrition has produced some disproportionately bad health outcomes. And we can do better than that. So as we're able to explain and get people to understand the direct correlation between what we eat and our physiological outcomes, I think that we're seeing more and more people able to make that commitment and say, I'm going to go ahead and break those chains and implement a new healthy lifestyle. And this becomes all the more important when we're talking about what do we pass on to our children's generation.
So, why did or do you decide to continue on studying cellular biology?
Ooh, I love science. I've always loved science, mathematics. I mean, I grew up in that household. I've always had a very high level of literacy, and to this date, I still do my best to read at least 4 to 6 or more books every month. Literacy is a beautiful thing. Science is a beautiful thing. I am committed to being and functioning as a scientific futurist. You've probably heard me use the term describing what I do. And in scientific futurism, it is a collection of some 15 different science-based disciplines, of which biology and technology and epidemiology and health, these are all significant disciplines in this lifestyle that I'm living. So I'm fascinated by cell biology. I'm fascinated by how do things work. In science, we call this the Newtonian perspective. What are the mechanics of how things work? And when we talk about the human body, a collection of some 50 trillion cells, which is also a vehicle to hundreds of trillions of co-lives or life forms living with us. Bacteria, 100 trillion bacteria inhabiting our gut, helping our digest our food and regulate our body chemistry. It's all fascinating. So why do I love cell biology? It's because it allows me to answer some very fundamental and very important questions about who I am and how healthy I want to be and how long I want to live.
All right, so the next question is kind of a two-part question. So, is being on a plant-based diet more expensive, less expensive, or about the same as eating on a standard American diet? And what is your definition of a standard American diet?
Well, let me answer that second part first, because I think it's important that we understand what is the SAD. That's the acronym for Standard American Diet. And many people say that's sad. And the outcome from the Standard American Diet is unfortunately very sad in that it has provoked a whole spectrum of chronic diseases, non-infectious diseases, but these chronic diseases such as cardiovascular disease, cancer, atherosclerosis or clogged arteries, and immune system disorders, a whole spectrum of these diseases and disorders that are unnecessary. So this sad diet, which consists of unreasonable amounts of junk food, of fast food, of high fatty foods, of foods that adults, such as dairy products, most adults are lactose intolerant after the age of 36 months, which means they're designed as babies to consume their mother's milk, not the milk of another species. But unfortunately, within this national dietary culture, we're encouraged to consume dairy products all throughout life. Americans consume far too much sugar, more sugar than any other nations in world history. Americans eat on average, as part of the Standard American Diet, an average of 220 pounds of animal flesh per year per person. And so the Standard American Diet is not only a disaster in provoking a spectrum of chronic diseases, and the evidence is overwhelming to prove this is the absolute fact, but that it's also all of that sugar, all of that meat, all of those processed products, all those microwavable products, and beers, and all these things that Americans relish and love to consume is very expensive. The only way that the standard American diet is cheaper than eating healthy is with fast food. For some odd reason, the food that makes you the sickest the fastest is the cheapest. And so, therefore, it captures a lot of people suffering at the lower end of the social economic hierarchy are consuming undue amounts of fast food because they find that they can feed themselves for an entire day on $5 to $6. Whereas eating healthy, especially eating organic healthy, if you're not growing it yourself, yes, you're going to be investing some money in it. So for people who say that eating healthy, eating organic is too expensive, I say, well, let's figure in the annual expenses, out-of-pocket expenses that we spend on healthcare or sickness maintenance, as some of us call it. And when you average in that the average American is spending out of pocket maybe $6,500 out of pocket on healthcare every year. No, actually, no. I'm getting my numbers mixed up. Spends about $1,800 to $1,900 out of pocket versus the $11,000 spent by the whole system on keeping an average American healthy every year, spending $1,800 to $1,900 out of pocket. If we figure that into the cost of food purchase per week that would keep us healthy, eating healthy is much less expensive than not eating healthy.
Okay, so what are some stereotypes of being on a plant-based diet? I.e., you'll wither away, or if you don't eat this, you might get sick. Protein, you need meat, etc. So, what are some of the
Yeah.
stereotypes?
Well, I think you've done a great job of answering that question, but let's just break down some of these. They're often asked questions. Well, if you don't eat meat, where you're going to get your protein? That is actually the absolute wrong question because there is protein in everything we eat. All plants are made from protein, all of them. Protein is the very basic building block of life itself. So, spinach per gram has more protein than any steak out there. The most protein dense food of them all is a sea vegetable or a sea algae called spirulina. Now it's 70% protein. So the idea that you're not getting your protein if you're not eating meat is a mythology that needs to be discarded. What the question could be is if you're not eating meat, where you're going to get your essential amino acids, that collection of some 9 amino acids that are generally not synthesized by the body. And so we have to find sources where they've already been synthesized to eat them. And that's in the nuts and the seeds and the grains, which contain the whole spectrum of amino acids necessary for the building blocks of life. There's this long-standing concept that eating vegetables is boring. And, as a longtime vegan vegetarian myself, I agree with people who say, I don't want to eat boring food. But the difference between boring food and exciting food is in the culinary spices and how to use them and proper preparation techniques, which I've mastered because I am an award-winning raw vegan chef. So I like to eat delicious food. I take a photograph of what I eat every day and I post it up and everybody says, I want to eat like you eat. And I says, yes, the colors are beautiful, the palettes, the textures and everything real dense. I know how to balance out these foods, but the taste is amazing. When people step inside my house, they say, oh my goodness, your house smells like heaven. It's because we know how to use the culinary spices. And the last point about these stereotypes that vegans are skinny and no strength and no muscles. Well, I will in September turn 65 years young.
Congratulations.
It's a
Congratulations.
beautiful feeling because I feel absolutely as invincible as I felt when I was in my late 20s and early 30s. Absolutely invincible. And the beautiful thing about it is that I have an exercise regime that a person half my age would be struggling to attain. And just real quickly, every morning I wake up, and this is nearly every day of the week, maybe 1 or 2 days of the week, I might have something pressing me so much in the morning that I might skip part of the routine. But most days I wake up, I do 3 sets of abdominal exercises, knees to the chest, 90-degree leg lifts, and sit ups. I do 150 reps each, 1 set, no break. Start at one, finish at 150, rest for a few minutes, and do the next one. After which, I then go out and I do 20 minutes of high impact interval training where I walk real briskly for 90 seconds and then take off running as fast as I can maintain for the next 30 seconds. That's a 2-minute cycle. I do 10 of those. And that brings me to a wonderful pace every day. And then the last exercise I do it once in the morning, and now I've gotten in the habit of doing it once before I go to bed. Most days I'll do anywhere between 100 and, in the case of yesterday, 136 push-ups in 1 set, Brother Moya.
Wow.
No break, start at one and finish at least 100. Most days I strive to do at least 130 because that's 2 push-ups for every year I've cycled around the sun outside of my mother's womb.
Wow, man, that's actually making me sweat right now, brother.
Yeah, it does bring on the sweat. It's a serious cardiovascular exercise. And among all of the things that I do to maintain my body, breath management is as important as anything else. Breath management, hydration, full spectrum nutrition, the exercise, getting good rest, detoxifying my body, and maintaining a beautiful mind, body, spirit matrix. These I call the 7 principles of optimal health. I teach these in my books, and this is absolutely the way that I live consciously every hour of every day.
Wonderful. So that's it from my end. Is there anything else you want to say to the people before we wrap it up?
Yes, to the people I want to say, imagine yourself at half your current age. Again, I'm turning 65, so that would put me at 32 years, 33 years. And so if I imagine myself at half my age, how was my body at that time? What was my weight? How did my body perform? How did I feel? Did I feel invincible? 33 years was the year I got married. So it was a beautiful time in my life. So imagine that now using the 7 principles of optimal health, using optimized nutrition, exercise, and all these other routines, you can go back and reclaim it. We can now extend our life expectancy out to 100 years should be an absolute acceptable minimum. And so for as myself, my plan is to live 120 years. How long do you plan to live? The operational word is plan. So to everyone out there, I am proving that all of this is possible. I am proving that we can live in impeccable health, disease resistance like no one would ever imagine. At age 65, nearly 60, or actually 64, nearly 65, I'm proud to say I've never been on pharmaceutical drugs, and I aim to stay that way until I'm well past 100 years, and I might never go on pharmaceutical drugs in my life.
Wonderful. Wonderful. So where can the people reach you?
They should get the books. They can go to livingsuperfood.com, where we say food is nature's most perfect medicine. Living Superfood, no S on that. There is a contact page. You also see photographs of the plates of the food that I eat, and they do look quite spectacular. You can get the recipes books and the science books, total of 6 books in the series. I encourage everyone out there, you have to commit. You have to commit to something that will have a long-term positive impact and return on investment. And I can't think of any better investment, Brother Yamoya, than investment in perfect health.
All right. And just to confirm, you're also still doing consultations, correct?
Yes, we do
Okay.
one-on-one consultations. A lot of people come to me with a diagnosis. The diagnosis might be they're on long-term prescription drugs for hypertension or for high blood sugar. They might be suffering from cardiovascular disease. Most Americans are overweight and or obese, so I get a lot of those. But we have to understand that the overweight, obesity, metabolic disorders, cardiovascular, and other type of disorders, there is a single common thread to them all. And so it kind of makes it for real easy for me that I can just show them how what you're talking about is connected to this common thread. Now let's deal with that common thread. Let's get that out of your way so that this disorder does not continue to manifest in your life. Once you cut off the source of the disorder, now we can fix the symptoms.
Wonderful. Well, as always, Keidi, I appreciate you. We appreciate you. And on that note, this is the Living Superfood Show. Until next time, take care.